What an odd way to start a joyous holiday season. A story about Alzheimer's disease. I mean, honestly, who comes up with these ideas for a service to be held at this time of year? Yet, when Heidi told me on Tuesday that our speaker for today had to cancel at the last minute and asked me to step in, I eagerly said yes, like a second-string baseball player excited to get off the bench. A talk about Alzheimer's disease should not be too difficult. I have some experience with this. But like many second-string players eager to get in the game, when the action actually starts, you realize how difficult it is. And the thing about second-string players is that you never know what will happen. I quickly realized that this was not really a talk about Alzheimer's disease. It was a talk about my mother's experience with Alzheimer's disease and what I came to understand about the effect of the disease on me and on my family. Still, it's an honor to talk with you this morning and to relate my experience with Alzheimer's. I will tell you that it has been a challenge to craft my story so that it can be meaningful to others, honest, but not so truthful that it ruins your day. The overlying theme of the service today is to savor your story. But what exactly is there to savor about the story of Alzheimer's? We all know something about the disease: irreversible memory loss, loss of bodily control, confusion, depression, not really a holiday topic. In preparing this talk, I kept thinking, what value can my talk have to you? Or at a minimum, how can I just tell a good story? For me, stories worth listening to should always contain some uncertainty, but there's very little mystery to the ending about stories of Alzheimer's. I decided that this cannot be a story about the outcome of Alzheimer's, but rather it is my story and the story of my family who lived with this disease for many years. I'm sure everyone's experience with living with and caring for a person who has an illness is unique, and I have no knowledge of the general pathology of Alzheimer's disease. But at the core of my story is my struggle to answer the same question that people have struggled with since the dawn of time. Who are we, and what makes us, us? And beyond that, what happens when we are gone? I cannot tell this story without telling you about my life over the past 6 or 7 years. So most of my story will be relating what it is like to live with an Alzheimer's victim. This said, I don't want my story to be horribly sad or a story without hope. So let me get the sad part out of the way. 1 year ago, almost to the day, my mother died of Alzheimer's. So, with these warnings, here goes. First, I should introduce the characters that will appear in my story: my mother, my father, my brother and sister, my wife Laura, and son Andy. My mother, Alida Adrianza, was born in 1930 in Canada, the child of immigrants from the Netherlands who were trying to enter into the U.S. At that time, it was easier to gain entry into Canada, and I am not sure exactly how my mother entered the U.S. She did not become a citizen until she married my father in 1953. My grandmother was a maid, and my grandfather worked as a landscaper. The family lived in a chicken coop in New Jersey for almost all their lives, past the time when my grandfather died and until my grandmother was in her 80s. My mother lived a simple life with a stern, much Dutch mother, intolerant of wasted time on frivolous matters such as reading or playing games. Affection was a luxury. Even children needed to be productive. My grandfather lived in fear of his wife and had to hide when coddling his children. My mother completed high school and did what many women of her time did. She got a job as a secretary and met a man that would provide for her and that she could love. My mother worked raising 4 children in what I believed as a child was a perfect household. Middle class, my father took the train to New York City. my mother had dinner ready when he came home, and she spent her days looking out for the children. My father and mother separated when I was 22. My father had finally accepted that he was gay and finally had the courage to live his life in a way that made him happy. My mother was alone, her life shattered. She found a job in a Hallmark store and began a new life in her mid-40s. The children grew up, moved away, and my mother was happy, socially active, but never with the life that she had imagined. As she aged, she had few loves in her life: her favorite baseball team, the New York Yankees, her dogs, and most of the time, most of her children. My sister is a nurse, my brother a printer. They both are wonderful people, and I love both of them dearly. Unfortunately, they're not good friends, and although they were not always able to spend lots of time with my mother in the final years of her life, they both loved our mother. They live in New Jersey as well, not far from where my mother lived, but communication between the two of them had been difficult. Now that you know the characters, the story is next. 8 years ago, my mother started living with Laura, Andy, and me part-time. Part-time grew into full-time, and finally, full-time grew to be too much. For the last year of my mother's life, she lived in an assisted living facility in South Ogden. The decision to have my mother move in and to live with our family was easy. I've always believed that when we are given a chance to do good, we are really just given a gift. Sometimes we all find it a challenge to be the person we want to be, and this was a chance for me to be a person I admired. A significant burden of this fell on Laura and Andy, but both agreed this is what family is for. Let me say right away that Laura and I are incredibly lucky. We have employment that is flexible, and as a university student, Andy was capable of helping. My brother and sister agreed to the decision, not because they didn't feel the same way as I did about our mother, but because their lives are more structured due to the economic realities of their job. In the first few years, life was wonderful. My mother was able to dress and shower. She had a place in the family. She helped around the house and spoiled the dog. Yes, things got lost, broke, and everything took more time. She could set the table, but not always remember where to find the dishes and utensils. She could physically take items from the dishwasher and put them in the cupboard, even though we never knew which cupboard they would end up in. My mother's memory loss came in fits and starts. Stress, troubles with her physical health, and overexertion seemed to take a toll. Her decline was not really a slow progression, but rather it was like falling down a set of stairs. She could go for 6 months without any decline, and then catch a cold or suffer from a urinary tract infection and immediately lose memory that she would never recover. Even though the doctor told her and us that she would never gain back her memory, in these long periods of stability, I would think, maybe, just maybe, it would be okay. My mother lost her ability to read a few years later, and she could not watch a movie or a baseball game because she could not remember what had happened a few pages ago or an inning back. She started to have difficulty with motor control. On Christmas Eve of 2011, she broke her right shoulder in a fall. On Christmas Eve of 2012, she broke her left shoulder in a fall. We hired full-time help in 2012 because my mother could no longer be alone. In the summer of 2013, she broke her hip. In the early stages of her decline, she could take care of herself, interact with others, and fake it in a way that most teenagers would admire. She was a master of holding it together for an hour or so when guests came over or when she came to this church. But time took its toll. First, she forgot my brother, who passed away 30 years ago. Then she forgot where she was and could not understand how she came to Ogden. Finally, she could not separate the past from the present. She worried that her mother and father did not know where she was and could not understand that they had both died decades earlier. Sometimes she would ask me directly, "Is my mother still alive?" And I would have to tell her no. Hundreds of times I watched her cry. Sometimes she would get angry that her mother or brother had forgot to call her. In all of this time, she never mentioned my father. Somehow, he was a memory, either too difficult or not important. I could never decide which. She missed her dogs that she had as a child, and finally she went through her packing phase. If Laura and I would leave her alone for an hour, she would start to pack to go home. When I asked her where was home, she would not know. When I told her she sold her house because she wanted to live with Laura, Andy, and I, she would not believe me. Ultimately, we had to take down pictures and put away items because she would have all of them in a pile on her bed. Every day, Laura would take all of her clothes from her packing pile and put them back in the drawers. During these times, it was clear that she knew something wasn't right. She just wanted to go back home, but a home that no longer existed. This phase would alternate with her belief that this was her own house and that Laura, Andy, and I were just visiting. It was at these times that she would say things like, "I don't know why I put the picture there. It's the ugliest picture I can imagine." Or she would say, "I don't know why I got that dish. It's the most horrible thing to have on the table." It was nice to be able to laugh about my mother at these times, and most importantly, I still recognized my mother as my mother. She was herself, but things would change. Soon my mother became difficult. She was adamant about leaving to the point where we had to physically restrain her. Laura and I were having doubts. She would not recognize her grandson Andy, and this was painful for him. Although we had help during the day, my mother cried and was unhappy. My brother and sister would visit, and often for these few days, it buoyed my mother's spirits. She rallied physically and mentally, and my siblings thought things were manageable. Of course, things got worse. Half the time, my mother would not recognize me as her son. Most of the time, I was her brother Dirk, which suited me fine. Dirk was the good brother, the brother who loved and cared for her, so to me, this was a wonderful compliment. At times, she believed I was her husband, which was awkward with Laura in the house, although we did joke that this was Utah and not out of the ordinary. Finally, even with help, we couldn't do it. We talked of moving my mother into assisted living. I resisted. I was a good son, and a good son does not move his mother out of the house. Who was I if we were to do this? In the spring of 2015, when I was out of town for work, Laura, Andy, our daughter Sherry, and Sherry's husband moved my mother to an assisted living facility. I could not have done it, and I still have mixed feelings. Finances quickly became an issue. $6,000 a month, plus the cost of keeping my mother's wonderful aide, Lorena. I visited her almost every day. The facility where she lived was wonderful, but her housemates were troubled. I suppose the people were like my mother. They became the best or worst of what they truly are. If they were mean when they lost their ability to follow social norms, they became more mean. If they're scared, they became more so and would scream in terror. But if they were nice, they were even more nice. There were people that could not walk who tried to help others walk. There were people who wanted to play, even though they were not capable of playing. My mother was also who she was. She had no time for complaints. If someone didn't like the food, she'd tell them they were lucky to have it. When people were unhappy, she would tell them to toughen up. For me, it was not pleasant. There were men who wanted to take their clothes off in front of the women, and women who were just out and out nasty. Through it all, there were the nurses' aides, mostly Weber State students hoping to enter the nursing program. They all earned a minimum wage while cleaning, feeding, and lifting. They consoled those who were depressed, wrestled those who were belligerent, and talked quietly to those who were lonely. In 2015, I began to worry about my mother's financial situation. My father and mother had never divorced, so that my mother would receive my father's retirement benefits. I told my father he needed to divorce my mother, or he would be at risk of losing his and his partner's financial security. I signed the divorce papers for my mother. Have you ever seen the movie I'm Still Alice? It's a 2014 movie starring Julianne Moore and Alec Baldwin. The movie is a story of a woman named Alice, which was my mother's Americanized name, and her life with Alzheimer's. In the movie, Julianne Moore, Alice, struggles with the loss of her identity. Society no longer treated her like Alice, but like someone to be pitied, not admired, not respected. The movie was easy compared to reality, and my reaction to this movie provides the uncertainty in my talk. By the fall of 2015, I began to ask the question of whether my mother was still Alice. When she did not know who she was and who I was she still Alice? When she could not eat on her own, remember her children, or speak, was she still Alice? She no longer knew her story. Not her name, not her history, nothing. Was Alice gone? If so, who is this in front of me? Did I have a duty to this person? If she does not know who I am, does it matter if I visit her? I will tell you that even though my mother did not know who I was, she was happier when I was with her. When I brought the dog, she was brighter. Her mind was blank, but there was something. I don't know if it is a soul or a heart, but I came to the belief that she still was Alice, even though she did not know she was Alice. I believe that what is left when we don't know who we are or who anyone else is really what we are deep inside, and that not even a horrible disease can take this away. My mother would do less than a newborn, but yes, she was still Alice. The last time I heard my mother's voice was when I was telling her about the Baseball World Series in the fall of 2015. As a Yankees fan, she hated the other New York team, the Mets. Last October, the Mets lost in the World Series to the Kansas City Royals. I told my mom that I had happy news. The Mets lost the World Series. Her expression did not change. She was lost. But 5 seconds later, she laughed and smiled. And then she was gone again. Thank you.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me, sing to me quietly? Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When